A big thank you to our sponsor, Signature Books, for supporting us here at the Mormon News Roundup. Please go over to signaturebooks.com and check out some of the latest publications that they have. Currently, they have things like Lighthouse, the Gerald and Sandra Tanner story by Ronald V. Huggins, one of the stories about the two most famous critics of Mormonism today. We've also got the story of Dr. Martha Hughes Cannon, a biography, suffragist, senator, and plural wife. That one is by Constance Lieber. And then we've also got a really good one here called DNA Mormon by Benjamin E. Park. So for all of your interests in Mormon studies and research, go over to signaturebooks.com and support our sponsor. Thank you.
I like that.
Kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson. You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup, where Tom, Rebecca, and D-Bays will ruminate on the great and spacious beehive. Hey, this is episode 46 coming at you, and we're going to have the Alternative Mormon and Rebecca Biblioteca co-hosting. There's been some new temple ceremony changes. We're going to update you on that. The Great Salt Lake is also in the news for environmental reasons and for all the wrong reasons. The SEC is investigating the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, specifically Ensign Peak. We're going to bring you up to speed on that. Mitt Romney's Mormon bona fides have been questioned. And finally, a $100 million Jesus-inspired Superbowl ads. Now, if you want to get in touch with us, we're at MormonNewsRoundup.org, or you can send us an email to kolob@MormonNewsRoundup.org. Rebecca, how's it going?
I'm doing great this morning. How are you?
Hey, better than I deserve. And Tom, the Alternative Mormon, welcome to the Mormon News Roundup.
Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate being on. I'm excited.
Hey, it's great to have you here. Hey, you recently started a podcast. What is it called, and what's your podcast all about?
Yeah, so very recently, my first episode hit right around the new year. So I'm about a month into this podcasting journey. It's totally new to me. So the name of the podcast is the Alternative Mormon Podcast. The reason I called it, or I came up with that title, is I've recently gone through a faith transition myself over the past year or so. And I started to notice as I was on, forums, Reddit, Twitter, whatever, that at least the very outspoken ex and post-Mormons, I didn't feel like I fit in there, and I didn't feel like I fit in with the active members. And I was like, well, where is my space? And so I came up with the name Alternative Mormon. Since then, I've learned that there is no one way to ex or post-Mormon, right? There's many ways. But at the time, I didn't know that. I felt pretty alone in the journey. And so really what I'm doing on the podcast is just kind of sharing my faith transition, and then sharing how it's a little bit different, and trying to create a constructive, positive space rather than maybe a deconstructive or negative space. Some content is maybe more negative, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. There's a place for that. I think we all need deconstruction, but I would rather focus on the construction than the deconstruction.
I've taken a look at your podcast. It looks really interesting. You've had some pretty fascinating guests on. Can you tell us a little bit about who you've had on in the last month? I was impressed.
Yeah, I kind of impressed myself. I was surprised that people responded to me. I just kind of shot a shot out into the dark. 2 weeks ago, I had John Hamer on, who, as soon as I started the podcast, he was someone immediately I wanted to talk to, because I've loved listening to John Hamer. The community of Christ really interests me. And so he came on, he shared his faith transition, why Community of Christ is a possible option for those transitioning away from the LDS faith. I also had Stephen Murphy, or the Murph, from Mormonism with the Murph. And I have some other interesting guests. I don't want to highlight them too much because I'm still working out scheduling that are coming on. And one thing that's a little bit different than maybe some of the other Mormon podcasts that you see the same guests transition is I'm focusing on faith transitions generally. So I have scheduled a evangelical that transitioned to atheism. I plan to talk to like ex-Jehovah Witnesses, maybe some like ex-Muslims, as I'm looking at different religions. So yeah, I'm hoping to be a little bit different, but yeah, I've already had some really interesting guests so far.
So Tom, who should listen to this podcast?
Well, I'm hoping to keep a platform that's hopefully non-threatening to active members, although I could see a very orthodox TBM having a hard time listening to my show. But hopefully active members who are a little open-minded. maybe the nuanced members, the ex-Mormons, the post-Mormons. And I'm even doing a segment on my show where I explore multiple religions. So I'm hoping that even those who maybe don't have a Mormon background could be interested in, I want to learn about this specific religion, or if they just want to learn about Mormonism generally. So hopefully everybody, like I say, trying to keep it non-threatening, but I could see how, there are certain people who are closed-minded and wouldn't want to listen to anything that challenges their faith. So.
Is there anything else about your personal life or religious beliefs that you want to share before we hop into this episode?
Yeah, like I say, where I felt like I kind of didn't fit in, it seems like the stereotypical route transitioning away from the church is maybe going to an agnostic or an atheistic religious belief system. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying there is, but for me, that's not what happened. I still consider myself a Christian, which I know a lot of people think is kind of interesting because that's a little different. And so I've talked about that on my show. But the big thing with the show is like, even though I consider myself a Christian, I'm totally open-minded. Like I talked about on one of my Twitter posts the other day that, now I'm putting this puzzle back together and I have no picture on the box anymore. Like I'm just putting the puzzle together and I'll go anywhere that puzzle takes me. And so that's sort of what the Alternative Mormon podcast is. It's like, I'm on this journey. If you want to join in, come along and join in, and let's explore things. Let's deconstruct, let's reconstruct, and let's just build this together.
Well, we definitely do want to join in on your journey. That's why you're here with us today, which we're very grateful for. We have linked to the Alternative Mormon podcast in the show notes. But before we hop into the news, Tom, I understand that you have the Mormon News Roundup joke of the week.
I do. And I will admit, I don't have the best sense of humor. So I relied on artificial intelligence technology to help me come up with a joke.
That's cheating.
Yeah. Well, just like everything, it seems like I'm always a step behind what the new cool thing is. So just this last week, I finally got into ChatGPT and I started playing around with it. In fact, you can see on my Twitter, I wrote a Doctrine and Covenants section about cats for the white cat prophecy, who I understand is coming on your show in a few weeks. And so I asked ChatGPT to give us some scripture about the Mormon News Roundup. Wow. So it says, "Verily, verily, I say unto thee, O ye who listeneth to the Mormon News Roundup, thou art a guest in the house of the Lord. Thou hast been invited to partake of the knowledge and wisdom that shall be imparted unto thee through the power of the Holy Ghost. Thou shalt approach thy time on the podcast with reverence and respect, remembering that thou art in the presence of the Lord. Thy words and actions shall be guided by the principles of the gospel, and thou shalt strive to edify and uplift those around you."
Hey, all those in favor, please manifest. Okay, so I would like the podcasters to know that there was no opposed votes. And even though I didn't call for an opposed vote, but that doesn't matter. Very good. That is very inspiring stuff here. Nice
I'm going to add that to my scripture mastery list. Absolutely.
Absolutely. That's good. I really appreciate that. Yes, we are having the white cat prophecy who's coming on. And I think that's going to fit right in with him. And so thanks so much for being here. Let's hop into the news. And Rebecca, this hit last night. You got breaking news, right?
I do I have breaking news and then I have break-in news. So I guess we better cover both of those. So late last night, like very late last night, the church dropped a news story because, of course, we know Friday night around 10 o'clock is the hottest time that everybody's paying attention to the news. And this was a statement. The church, Elder Oaks, actually made this statement to sort of clarify a position on a legal, something that they had backed legally, which was called the... Remind me.
Respect for Marriage Act.
Yes, the Respect for Marriage Act, which I know you covered this on the program at one point when I wasn't on, but basically there were several parts to this. Some people had a little bit of a misunderstanding, perhaps, about what the church was saying. It was more about protecting religious liberty than perhaps affirming protections for LGBTQ. So the church had to kind of come out and just clarify what they said. What did you think of it? The statement.
This basically, you're right. It was dropped on a Friday night, which is usually where you put stuff that you really don't want people to know that much about or kind of pay attention to. This basically clarifies because the mainstream media, the so-called mainstream media here, I sound like a Fox News pundit here, but they said the highlights for when the Marriage for All Act, when the church came out in favor of it, the highlights were Mormon churches in favor of gay marriage. And that was a thunderbolt across the entire nation. And it just really melted the web. In fact, that was one of the number one stories for last year. Well, that's not the case. The church is not in favor of gay marriage. The church is in favor of protections for religious institutions to perform marriages in the way that the church sees fit. It's a serious distinction here. Tom, what did you think of this article that hit last night?
Yeah, so I actually, for whatever reason, follow Dallin H. Oaks on Instagram. And I noticed as I was on Instagram that he posted on his story, which is very rare for Dallin H. Oaks. And so I did watch his little briefing on it. To me, it was kind of sad because the focus was very much on tax exemption status and accreditation for BYU. And to me, it felt like it was a focus on the church protecting itself rather than helping or protecting individuals.
Yeah, from the article itself, the article says, some of our members have expressed concerns that the new nation respect for marriage law is in conflict with the church teachings against same-sex marriage. We feel the need to clarify those particular, we feel the need to clarify that. So yeah, the church, it hasn't changed position, which is what the original statement said. It says the church's position of espousing that marriage is between one man and one woman. It hasn't changed. Nothing has changed from the church's perspective. The only thing that the church is in favor of is religious institutions and BYU private educational institutions being able to perform marriages in the way that the church sees fit. And they're definitely in favor of that part. They're not in any way, shape, or form in favor of gay marriage. There is no way that you can possibly say that. And that's what this statement basically codifies.
It kind of struck me what you just read at the beginning where they said we want to clarify because some people are concerned. It reminded me of the Musket Talk, known as the Musket Talk, where they said some donors are very concerned. They're having to address this certain faction, who they are, maybe the very orthodox that are the ones that would be upset by this. So they certainly, I think, cater perhaps to that group. And want to make sure that they understand and it's clear.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, whenever the church feels the need to clarify something, it's not that, well, we haven't done a good job of explaining this in the past, or, we could have done a much better job of saying what the Marriage for All Act was in relation to church doctrine. It's some people have misunderstood. It's always the media has misunderstood. The members have misunderstood. The world itself has misunderstood. It's not that we did a horrible job in our initial espousing of support for the Marriage for All Act, which was incredibly confusing, and that it's been 2 months since we've really clarified it. It's not that we have done anything wrong. It's everyone else has a misperception. So any other thoughts on this one, Tom?
No, the only other thought I have, and I don't mean to sound like a conspiracy theorist or that I know the future or anything, so don't take it that way, but it does remind me of other parts in our church's past when pressures seem to mount on certain hot button issues. And I'll just keep it at that.
Absolutely. Now, there's another breaking news article that happened last night too, Rebecca, that you made us aware of. And this happened in Manti, Utah. What happened down there?
It did happen in Manti, and this is why I call it the break-in news, because that is what happened. Somebody tried to break into the Manti temple and was fairly successful. I think they removed a panel. They had taken a truck from Snow College and driven there. And when security confronted them, he said, well, this is my house. And they said, well, what is your name? My name is Elohim. So obviously, he needed to get in quickly, right? It was a sad situation. But then he went into some other issues that, anyway, it was sad, but they were able to stop him. The good news is it did not happen. So
yes, this is quite the news headline. Elohim breaks into the temple. Wow. Now, there are a lot of temple changes this week, but this wasn't the one that I was expecting. I'm just going to put it that way. That's not at all what I was expecting. So, well, we're glad that no one was hurt. It appears that no one was hurt. There was a little bit of property damage, but yes, Elohim did break into his own house. Luckily, they took him into custody, and apparently there was very little that happened from that. Now, that's from the breaking news perspective. Now, from a lot more long-standing news, how can the church prevent its headquarters from becoming a toxic wasteland? Tom, is the church's headquarters going to become a toxic wasteland? What's happening?
Well, for anyone who lives in Utah or familiar with some of our environmental concerns, the Great Salt Lake is lowering in elevation. It's going away. So this article I found really interesting. And like I said off air, I won't go deep in depth because I know I am very good at putting people to sleep if I talk too much about this. But I've even talked about it on my show a little bit. My profession is I'm a civil engineer, and I've even done some work in water resources. So I'm fairly familiar with this topic, and I have some opinions, but they're sort of off topic. But this article is about Governor Cox setting up a meeting with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints because the church is the greatest or the largest holder of water rights in the state of Utah. And so I think the governor sees that and he wants to talk to them and see if they can come up with some sort of coordination to help things out. I will say, this last summer when we were having the drought concerns, it was interesting to me to see, at least where I live, certain church lawns and temple lawns still looking, immaculate and green and beautiful. And I'd be curious. I ought to do the math and figure out how much acreage of green grass across the state of Utah the church has, and what kind of impact that could have. Not even talking about their water rights, just if they could transition all of their landscape to a xeriscape landscape, what kind of impact that would have. So those are my brief thoughts on that. D-Vase, what were your thoughts while you were reading?
Yeah, well, we can't go in depth when the Great Salt Lake is so shallow, right? I mean, we're not going to be able to do an in-depth one. And I just want to clarify that the church is the largest private holder of water rights, because the Bureau of Land Management, obviously, and other government agencies have a huge amount of water rights in the state.
Correct. Yeah, thanks.
So let me ask you, Rebecca, should the church have a stake in these kind of regional politics? Why is this the church's business? Is this a government function, or what's going on?
I don't know. I think you could look at it both ways. When you were talking about the grass, I was a couple months ago when they were talking more about water shortage, I was thinking of the baptismal fonts that are filled in every stake center every Saturday. And I thought, that's a lot of water. I even tried to kind of estimate. I don't know what the measurements of a baptismal font are, but what I came up with, it was, gallons and gallons of water, like thousands and thousands. And I thought, will we perhaps someday have to return to sprinkling simply because of the water shortage? It's an idea. I'm not sure.
Well, Tom, let me ask you this, Tom. I listened to the Mormon Land podcast that discussed this, and they said that up to 90% of water usage is from watering landscaping and watering lawns, that an average person really only uses a couple of gallons a day. But when you factor in his or her lawn, that's when it really escalates. Is that accurate? And if you were to shut off all of the temples and all of the lawns and all of that, would that not go a long way to helping with this water shortage?
Absolutely. And it's important to remember just the way, infrastructure in Utah works. If it's from a tap and it goes down the sewer, it's still going to eventually go to the Great Salt Lake. So that's really not as much of a concern. We're concerned when we're sprinkling either landscape or irrigating, alfalfa fields. That's really where the concern gets. And I get, just like if you read comments of anything that you're familiar with, I'll get on KSL sometimes and read comments and just facepalm because people are going off about, there's development coming in. And, if we're developing alfalfa fields, it's actually great. If we're developing these, and well, at least from a water standpoint, there's other politics behind it. But if we're changing an alfalfa field that's getting, tons of, they call it acre foot is the unit they'll use a lot of times in irrigation. It takes about 1.5 acre feet per year of water to irrigate alfalfa or a little bit more. And so it's like, if we're converting that to minimal landscape and just water in, water out, in my opinion, that's a huge change and could help keep this from continuing to go down, because, we're just diverting all this water that naturally was going towards the Great Salt Lake, and we're putting it right where we want to grow, or right where we want nice green landscapes. And I like a yard just like anybody else, but I also like living in Utah and not breathing in toxic fumes.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on this one, Rebecca?
Well, I always think of how Temple Square, they try to protect the infrastructure around it. They're developing buildings, they're building malls, they're buying up property to make sure everything is pristine. So I just wonder how far that extends. To me, it would be the Salt Lake and the entire area that you need to protect the infrastructure of the area of the temple.
Yeah, apparently the
Mormon Mecca.
Yeah,
we need to make it beautiful, right? We should.
Yeah, apparently the church is concerned about landscape that extends about to the edge of the City Creek Mall. They're willing to pump $1.5 billion or maybe even $2.5 billion into downtown in the City Creek Mall because there's return on that investment. But there's no really return on an investment for the Great Salt Lake. That doesn't generate any money, so it seems like that's a low priority. But Tom, if we were to give you $1 million to solve this problem in 60 seconds or less, what is the solution?
We'll talk about this later with church finances, and this is kind of a joke because I won't get into it. There's lots of reasons this isn't a great idea, but D-Base, you and I talked off air a little bit about the hypothesis of building a pipeline all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Now, if there's any fellow engineers listening to me, please know I'm joking, because they'll be like, well, it's not going to work for this reason and this reason and this reason. But the preliminary cost estimates range between 40 and $100 billion. I know somewhere that there's $100 billion. So there's your solution in 60 seconds.
Yeah, okay. A simple solution from a human perspective would be to xeriscape all of your lawns and become a vegetarian. I guess that's probably the best thing that a human can do. Now, speaking of environmental catastrophes, we also had this week, unfortunately, on February 6, 2023, there was a tragedy. An earthquake struck Turkey and Syria, killing up to 25,000 people, and many more hundreds of thousands have been affected. And even until this time, there could still be people that are alive under the rubble. It's just a really horrible situation. Now, the church released a statement on this on February 6, 2023. This was from Tad Welch. This was on the Deseret News, and we will link to all of this in our show notes. There's a letter from the Europe Central Area Presidency, which offered assistance to these particular countries. Now, when I first read that, I was like, this really warms my heart. That's great. The church is really going out here and offering, giving assistance. But when you read this statement very carefully, it's very interesting. First of all, it did not come from the first presidency. It did not come from church headquarters. It only came from a Europe Central Area Presidency. So that shows you the level of priority. But number two, it's actually only an offer of assistance. That's very different from giving assistance, from giving actual assistance. An offer is different from actual assistance. What do you think about this article here, Rebecca?
Well, you're absolutely right in that. It's like seeing someone that need something and you kind of say, well, let me know if there's anything I can do. It's just sort of a platitude, right? It's not an action plan. It's not an actual offer. We will give this amount of funds. We will send this amount of manpower. It's just kind of a feel-good statement. It says, just let me know if I can help as you're kind of backing away, right?
Yeah, we're deeply saddened, and let us know if there's anything that you can do. Our prayers are with you. Tom, how do you feel about the church's statement here?
Yeah, so in other words, you're saying thoughts and prayers and maybe a couple chicken casseroles coming to Turkey. Is that right?
That's the thing. As I kept watching for the rest of the week, I was like, okay, the church has offered assistance. I can't wait to see what they're doing. And unless they've done it without letting us know, apparently the church has done nothing. And that would be very surprising if the church gave either monetary or volunteer hours. Because if you think back to Ukraine, the church really touted a lot of the things that they were doing in Ukraine. So it appears that the church has offered assistance, but has done nothing. And this is in very much contrast to, I don't know, there's a bunch of companies, including Tether, Bitfinex, Qcoin. They pledged $10 million in donations. JustGiving.com had over $1 million in one day. The Washington, D.C. Turkish embassy sent, not promised to send, sent significant supplies. The Red Cross immediately mobilized 2,000 responders. The UK-based Disasters Emergency Committee raised over $60 million and is actively doing it. There's a lot, and this list could be much longer. There's many organizations which have not just offered assistance, but given, pledged assistance, sent people, sent money. Amazon, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has, from my understanding, has done nothing. Okay, so, and that's why I really think about, if you think about Turkey and the church's presence in Turkey, I looked it up. There's only like 600 members in Turkey. There's no wards in Turkey. There's only like 9 branches. So 600 members, maybe 200 of them are active. The church's footprint in Turkey is absolutely minuscule. If you compare Turkey, I really thought a lot about this article. Turkey has like 100 million people, but there's not even a mission. The church doesn't even have any missionaries in Turkey. And if you think about a like-sized country, say the Philippines, the church has 23 missions in the Philippines, and that has about 100 million people. So the church is nowhere really involved with Turkey or Syria whatsoever. And, I listened to a Meet the Press report this week, and it said the single biggest factor hindering the rescue efforts was lack of manpower, not money. See, it's the manpower of people who are trapped underneath a building that is really what you need, not money right away. You need money in the long run. You need people right up front. So this is what I was imagining. Imagine if the church had sent every missionary in Europe to Turkey, even though we don't have a mission in Turkey. What if we had emptied Europe, sent all of the missionaries in Europe, 10,000 people, to Turkey during this time to help search for those fallen buildings? Imagine what we could have done. It doesn't take a specialized set of skills to assist professional responders. So you're assisting with professional responders. You can do that as a missionary. You can be the backup. You can be the helper. So, imagine what the church could do. And Rebecca, I know that we talked about this. You have a son that sent you pictures he's on a mission in Arkansas, and he's currently serving full-time for the church. And he sent pictures back of him cleaning toilets at the LDS chapels. Imagine instead if you had seen pictures of him being sent to Turkey and helping pull people out of the rubble. What would how would that make you feel? What would the difference of that be?
Well, the first thing is he's never cleaned a toilet in his life at home. So I was stunned that he was learning this new skill. But yeah, absolutely. I think that all the time, if only there was some kind of young workforce that could be mobilized. They're in a mechanism where they can quickly be mobilized. If only that existed. And I kind of feel with the Turkey situation that it's almost like a customer acquisition cost. You know what I mean? There is really no LDS presence there. If you send missionaries there, you're not going to get any bang for your buck. You're probably not going to get a convert. I hate to be cynical like that, but I feel like that might have something to do with it. I always think about other disasters. My husband served in Mexico City when the earthquake of 1985 happened. It was a huge earthquake, and they did mobilize the missionaries there to help as they could that were in the area. But of course, that was a very high membership, high baptizing mission. So there was a lot of a lot of a customer acquisition that can happen from that. So I don't know, but I do, I see missionaries in our area just kind of walking down the street, wandering around. I'm in Utah County. Doesn't seem like they have a lot to do. And I do think, there's so much they could be doing as far as work and humanitarian effort. And I would even say, wear those t-shirts that the church puts you in so that everybody knows these are LDS people that are helping. I mean, whatever it takes, get the manpower out there. That's what was needed, not a casserole.
Yeah, those missionaries in Europe, they already have visas, they already have passports, they already have healthcare, they're already mobilized, they're ready to go. What are your thoughts, Tom, on the church's response here to the Turkey-Syria earthquake?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And being familiar with mission rules in the White Handbook, I can almost bet you there's some rule that you're not allowed to dig through rubble in fears that you'll hurt yourself or hurt someone else. So maybe they're waiting to change that missionary rule before they send them. I don't know.
Well, it's kind of like the Good Samaritan on the side of the road. There was rules against the Good Samaritan helping out because he was a Samaritan. But Jesus said that we shouldn't be following those kind of rules. He really broke the mold. It's kind of a quandary. Why is the church not in Turkey? Why is the church in the Philippines so strongly but not in Turkey? And it's really that the church's presence needs to mirror places where people are most likely to join the church. And the church gains most of its converts from Protestants, from backslid Catholics, and from other Christians. Really, over 2/3 of the church's converts come from those. So if you had a mission in Turkey, if you just had one mission in Turkey and one mission in the Philippines, I bet that the Philippines mission would probably get 5 times the number of converts that Turkey mission would be. That's why we're not in Turkey. See, it's kind of interesting for me to think about because, say, a Catholic or a Protestant, they believe about 80 to 85% of the things that a Latter-day Saint does. They believe in God, they believe in Jesus, they believe in the Bible, they believe in repentance, they believe in baptism. It's like 95%. The average person in Turkey is a very secular or Islamic society. They probably only believe maybe 20% of the things. But from the church's perspective, those two people, it doesn't matter whether you believe 80%. It doesn't matter 90%. It doesn't even matter if you believe 99%. You have to be in all the way. So if you have even if you have like a Satanist and a Protestant, those are really looked at the same way from the church's missionary perspective because they're both going to the celestial kingdom. It doesn't really matter. So from like you said, Rebecca, return on investment, that's why we're not in Turkey, is because we're not going to get the level of baptisms that we do when we go to the Philippines. Yeah, and the one last thought on this is, if you think about the church, where's the church doing well missionary-wise? They're doing very well in Africa. But the problem with Africa is that the tithing receipts that you get back from Africa, you only get like 1/10 of the amount of money from those African saints. The average congregation in Africa only sends like $40,000 a year to church headquarters, whereas a North American congregation sends $400,000. So it's not just about missionaries, it's about money. I'm kind of cynical about this, but any other thoughts about the church's response here for the earthquake, guys?
Well, I just hope that maybe they'll see the light and maybe they will actually send something that makes a difference, be it money or manpower. I was going to say, because it's not over. The disaster just happened. There's going to be aftermath. There's going to be recovery. There's going to be quite a long period of time where they're going to need help in some way. So I hope
there was a huge national poll about 2 months ago, which rank ordered the likability of different religions and agnostic, atheists, Satanists, and everything. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was among the most low, just barely better liked than Satanists and less liked than atheists. And atheists used to be one of the most loathed persons on the planet. We're just barely above FLDS. If we want to change our perception on the world stage, then we need to do things differently on the world stage. And it's events like this where the church could mobilize thousands or tens of thousands of people and really save life. You see that missionary in the rubble pulling somebody up out, kind of like those old Jesus pictures. That changes public perception. Building another temple does not. So I just look at this as a huge missed opportunity. Now, our next article here is John Dehlin is the famous podcaster, and perhaps the king of Mormon podcasting, and he is counter-suing Jen Camp. I know this is a lot of inside baseball here, but John Dehlin, he is the CEO or the director, I guess, of the Open Stories Foundation. And he fired, the Open Stories Foundation fired Jen Camp here a few months ago. She was a fellow co-host. She was the director of operations. And Jen sued the Open Stories Foundation for sexual harassment, unpaid wages, and a number of other things. She's suing Open Stories for $250,000. Well, the Open Stories Foundation and John Dehlin, they are counter-suing her. John is suing for defamation. He's seeking punitive remuneration and an injunction against her so that she will stop speaking out about what he says is her misleading or mischaracterization of her service while at the Open Stories Foundation. This is really ugly, and this is a giant mess, but were you able to, what are your thoughts on this one, Tom?
So I'm not going to take a side because where I'm just barely getting into the Mormon podcasting world, that seems like a faux pas to start picking sides. But I will say, I listened to RFM read the countersuit on his show right after this broke. And it was really fun to listen to just from maybe a drama standpoint. If you recall, not too long ago, we had the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp hearings that people just loved and ate up. I think it's about time the Mormon media world has a Johnny Depp and Amber Heard drama story that we can get behind.
So you want the blood in the water. You like the shark. You like the spectacle. You probably watch a lot of Jerry Springer. That's you want to see drama.
This is Mormon Jerry Springer here now. Yeah.
Exactly. That's basically, exactly. And really no one outside of this tiny little community is going to really care or even follow this, right? Rebecca, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, it sounds like, Tom, you just want the popcorn. You want to get the popcorn out. So, well, I will say this about the situation. Before anyone makes a judgment or an opinion, please read the suits. Please watch the video of the Open Stories meeting where they talked with Clint and Jen and Carrie and John. Please watch that carefully. And I will say that I run the Mormon Stories book club for John DeLynn. So I have worked closely with him. And anecdotally, he is probably one of the most professional people I've ever worked with as a woman in the workplace. And that is my experience. I've had a very good experience running that book club, and we continue to run it together. So that is what I will say.
It just goes to show for me that people can leave the Open Stories Foundation, but they can't leave the Open Stories Foundation alone. I've heard that so many times. Yeah, I think Elder Maxwell, I think it was in general, I'm not sure about that, but I am thunderstruck by a couple of things. First of all, the Gen Camp commanded a salary of $80,000 a year. That is surprising. I don't know what I expected, but I don't know if I really expected that high. That seems quite high. And like I said, I don't really know anything about the situation. This is just all from the public disclosures here. And number two, Mormon Stories podcast host, they earned $1,000 per episode to co-host. And as soon as I heard that, guys, and in order to stay competitive, I decided to double both of your salaries for this episode.
And, I mentioned I'm an engineer, so I know how to do math. And I do know 2 times 0. So I appreciate that, though.
So what you're saying is I may need to triple it. Well, I'll have to get back to you. Tom, you strike a hard bargain, but I think I can swing that as well. I would normally blame this whole thing on patriarchy and the priesthood, but John DeLynn, he doesn't even hold the priesthood. So that's, I can't blame it on that either. But from listening to the Gen Camp, the 2-hour YouTube, where they, as you mentioned, Rebecca, where they discussed, the whole situation. It really seemed to me as I was watching that Jen Camp, she really subscribes to the President Eyring School of Communication. Okay, we better move along here.
We better move along.
We better move along. Okay, so now this was a big news here 2 days ago. This is the title of the article here is Mormon Church's investment arm. This is from the Wall Street Journal here. Mormon Church's investment arm under investigation by the Security and Exchange Commission. They're investigating the church's past efforts to keep its giant investment portfolio a secret, specifically Enzyme Peak, a practice that ended after a former employee revealed in 2019 that the church had amassed $100 billion of holdings. So the SEC is going back now and looking at the disclosure requirements, because if you have that kind of assets on hand, you're supposed to disclose them. Now, according to Mr. Nielsen, the church was not disclosing properly its total holdings. It's a little bit murky, but basically there's the Form 13F, and the church had written in that the church was managing, quote, over $1 million. Well, 100 billion is technically over $1 million. So in some ways, you could say that the church was following what the IRS rules, but 100 billion is a far cry from over 100 million. What are your thoughts on this SEC Commission article here, Tom?
As I was digging into this, I didn't realize until I learned of this article, this isn't the first time any of the Q15 have ran into some issues with the SEC. Elder Ballard, it seems, has his own run-in prior to becoming an apostle. And so hopefully that experience comes in handy for them.
Yes, back in the 1960s, I believe he was a broker, was that right? And his brokerage license was revoked, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he became a used car salesman. Or I'm not really sure. I don't have all the details. Rebecca, your thoughts on this?
Oh, sorry, that makes me laugh. So, well, I know it does seem like they're following the letter of the law. You're right. We are managing over $1 million, but certainly not the spirit of the law, because there's an awful lot of spirit in over $100 billion. I do know there are so many people that have So I talk to the Canadian tithing whistleblower quite a bit when these kinds of things come out. I also talk to people who are connected to the Widow's Mite. So I'm, kind of finding out what's going on behind the scenes. I know a lot of people have been petitioning different entities saying you need to take a look at the disclosure. Like this petitioning has been going on since everything broke back in 19 or 20. And so a lot of people right now are applauding that finally it looks like there's some momentum. And I'm always curious. So I looked on some more faithful type social media sites, and a lot of comments are, I'm sure that someone just forgot to file a piece of paper. The idea that it could be just as simple as a little something. So I'm looking forward to more details coming out. Maybe more people becoming aware that it is not as simple as just forgetting to file a little something.
Probably not. What the Widow's Mite report also, they emailed me about this. I exchanged a couple emails. They said what is probably going to happen is that there's going to be a settlement of some sort. There's going to be a settlement that the church is going to say, okay, we need to pay the IRS X amount. And there'll be a small fine and then a settlement. And that's probably all that's going to happen in this. It's not going to be some explosive deal. If you think back to like the Going Clear documentary on Scientology, where Scientology really, really, really flouted IRS laws. They said that we're not going to pay anything to the IRS and we're going to keep it all. And, they kept their tax exempt status. So, they kept it. And the church is definitely not as bad as Scientology. So people are saying, oh, the church is going to lose its tax exempt status. I do not see that happening. What I see is a small fine and a settlement that is probably going to happen from this. That's my estimation. Any other, the church's statement itself, the church did comment on this because it did go pretty global here. And Doug Anderson, church spokesperson, said, quote, "We are always willing to work with the government regulators to resolve concerns and are committed to full compliance." And I think that the church is going to be forced to have full compliance here because the church worked for so long to keep Ensign Peak a secret. The filings of the in particular entities within Ensign Peak were very opaque, and they were only found really by accident because they were all registered on the same IP address. People were able to put two and two together. So this is a very secretive organization, and they're being kicking and screaming to the table here and saying, hey, you need to look at these disclosures, and it doesn't appear that you've been on the up and up. And along the same lines, this is all in the same week. This is insane here. Whistleblower, this is from Religion Unplugged here. Paul Glatter, February 8th, 2023, religionunplugged.com. Whistleblower details new allegations about $100 billion LDS fund. So not only is the SEC looking into the past disclosures, but now the Senate itself appears to be, they've been submitted to the Senate committee, the U.S. Senate Finance Committee and Subcommittee on Taxation and IRS Oversight about the operations of the Salt Lake City-based Ensign Peak Advisors. So Mr. Nielsen, he is back at it, and he is still beating that drum of saying, hey, the church has not been playing ball properly, and I have the documentation to prove it. And these are additional documents. He said that the 2019 was just a precursor, was just a warm-up. He has new stuff, and he is holding back. I don't know, he submitted like 100 documents before. He's got many more documents. This is, it seems like it's getting worse and worse here.
Going to say quickly in talking to some of my friends about it. The difference here is that since he's petitioning lawmakers instead of the IRS, you could write a letter, right? You could start a grassroots campaign. You could let the lawmakers who could listen to you know how you feel about this. And I think there are ways to mobilize people to maybe get the opinion out that this needs to be scrutinized. So in that way, it's a more positive step because there's nothing you could do when they release the report before to the IRS. We all know we can't contact the IRS. There's absolutely no way. I try. I work in that industry. So, but in this case, there are ways to at least feel like you have something that you can do. You can petition a lawmaker and say, look, this needs to be scrutinized farther.
Yeah, absolutely. David Nielsen here, he could be becoming one of the richest Mormons of all time because he's saying in the documents here that he submitted to the Senate Finance Committee that the church has underpaid the IRS roughly $22 billion. That's basically what his allegation is. Well, according to the IRS whistleblower statute that they passed a few years ago, you get an award percentage. If you're a whistleblower for a large corporation, you get a percentage, something between 15 and 30% of the proceeds that are collected and attributable to the whistleblower's information. So if he gets 30% of $22 billion, the fine and the settlement is probably not going to be that much, but he could become a very, very wealthy Mormon really overnight. It's just amazing. And I do hope, though, that he pays tithing on that IRS award. I hope that he pays it on the gross and not the net. That seems like in the spirit of the Widow's Mite report has dropped several newsworthy items this year. They dropped a 2022 year-end report. They dropped a 55-page deep dive on Ensign Peak. And they also did a very interesting inflows and outflows. Now, I read the 55-page in-depth Ensign Peak. It's a little bit above my pay grade, but the year-end report, I think, is a lot easier. And the easiest of all, I think, is the inflows and outflows, which I'd like to just discuss real quick. So the church, brings in about $1 billion in fast offering a year, and that's just an inflow and a direct outflow. When you give $1 for fast offering, the church just takes that and gives that to someone else. They call that a pass-through. Okay, they save about $1 billion to the investment fund every year. They save total church administration is about, $800 million per year. BYU is about $1 billion per year. Temple and chapel construction is about $500 million per year. Utilities and maintenance is about $300 million a year. Stake and ward budgets is maybe $200 million a year. And then the missionary program is like $400 million a year. It really breaks it all down for you. And it's a really simple slide to understand church finances. And these are all footnoted about as well as you can.
Through the Widow's Mite report, it's 55 pages long. So it's well, they have nice graphics in there though. So it's not overly boring in my opinion. But I did have a couple of thoughts on it. I found a quote here from Joseph F. Smith in 1907 predicting the possible end of tithing. And I'll read it real quick. He says, but we expect to see the day when we will not have to ask you for $1 of donation for any purpose except that which you volunteer to give of your own accord, because we will have tithes sufficient in the storehouse of the Lord to pay everything that is needful for the advancement of the kingdom of God. And so my question is, when is enough in the storehouse? With $100 billion, assuming a conservative 4 to 8% growth, that's $4 to $8 billion per year. Obviously, that fluctuates depending on the market. But is that enough? And the other thing that kind of caught me was they have a path to $1 trillion. Hashtag make it $1 trillion, as some people say on Twitter. And so, yeah, it's to me, and maybe I'm a nerd and I'm just dry and this is my personality, but I would highly recommend people look up this Widow's Mite report. I found it really interesting.
But what you said, Tom, about Joseph F. Smith, David Bednar, first of all, last year in May of 2022, he said that the day has already come when the church does not need members tithing. He said, quote, the church does not need the members tithing, but they need to pay tithing for their own blessings. It was something along those lines. So we have definitely reached that day for sure. So the question is, what are we going to do with that information?
I just think about how far we've come. It used to be take your chicken to the tithing house, right? Just a couple hundred years ago. And now look at us. It's absolutely incredible. And it is very interesting to see where everything goes. It's not exactly what you would expect once you dive in. And I know there are different ways to kind of interpret the information, how much really is going to charitable giving, how much really is getting into the hands of people that need it, how much is simply saved in the quote rainy day fund, or as the one Ensign Peak employee said when it all came out, well, this is for the second coming. Although that's a little nebulous. Was there a category? I didn't read through the entire list. Was there a category that said second coming? And were there any subcategories?
Well, I think that's what they mean by Ensign Peak. See, the church's operating budget is like $6 billion a year. They bring in $7 billion a year in tithing. Right. So the $1 billion that they send over to Ensign Peak, that's the second coming rainy day, so-called second coming rainy day fund.
The second coming rainy day fund. That's it. So
yes, the second, or as I like to call it, the second coming rainy day sacred, not secret fund.
That's a long acronym. Have you tried to figure that out there?
You guys say
absolutely.
It's the second. You guys say it's the second coming fund, but I call it the. I don't know if you've ever seen the show The Expanse. There's a space shuttle that's specifically for the LDS, so I call that the LDS Space Shuttle Fund. They've got to build that once Earth is no longer viable. We have to build our Angel Moroni on top of our spaceship to get us out of here.
But I'm not sure about that because the Earth is supposed to become a glorified Urim and Thummim. The celestial kingdom is supposed to be here, so we're not looking for spaceships. We are going to get, everyone will get their own Urim and Thummim though. We're all going to get our own rock. That's going to be a big perk. I'm definitely looking forward to that, but I'm not familiar with the spaceship argument. Sorry about that. In fact, Joseph Fielding Smith said specifically that we were not supposed to be able to go into space. So, Brigham Young said that there was probably folks on the moon, but he never said that we would go visit them. You know what I mean? So, okay.
Well, I will say that something that I always heard growing up, and now I think this makes sense why there's so much money. I've always heard that they need this amount of money to save the Constitution. I don't know if you've ever heard that. My parents were big into telling me that. So I don't know exactly how that amount of money, maybe it means save the United States, but it all had to do with the Constitution is hanging by a thread and we're going to need billions and billions of dollars to somehow save the Constitution. So I don't know if that's a conspiracy theory or what you would call it, but I definitely heard that growing up.
I will say White Cat Prophecy has entered the chat, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the famous White Horse Prophecy there.
Exactly.
So, yeah, for sure. Now, there's more news here from this week here, and this is the Temple Endowment Ceremony and a couple of other things have changed up this week. This is an article here from Jana Reese. This was published on just a couple of days ago here on religionnews.com. More Jesus and less touching, 14 changes to the Mormon temple endowment ceremony. Just 4 years after the most recent revisions, the LDS ceremony has undergone many more changes. Now, we do want to be a bit sensitive about this because this is a ceremony inside of the temple is something that a lot of people hold sacred. So we're definitely not going to do an expose, but it's been reported in religious news. It's been on the Salt Lake Tribune. It's really been all over the place. It's something that I don't think that is really too big of a secret here. But there was a big endowment change, especially on February 7th. And the rumor on the street here, guys, is that new name Noah, he was caught flat-footed by this change. I know that's a big shock here, but it's more Jesus focused. And now the 5 temple covenants there that you when you go into the temple, you make 5 specific promises in the endowment ceremony. Those are also been updated in the handbook, right? And a lot of people were saying, hey, now this has just barely been put in the handbook. But actually, my daughter and my wife and I, we looked at this. It's been in there for like a year, I want to say, maybe even more. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I agree. I remember actually hearing about it in an elders quorum or a Sunday school like a year ago when someone, to my surprise, in a comment, just listed out the covenants. And I was like, I don't think you can do that. And then in the next sentence, he says, and I know I can say this because I just read it in the handbook last week. So yeah, it's been in there for at least a little while.
Yeah, I want to say a year. And it's amazing what gets snuck into the handbook because the handbook is always changing. You never know. They never really usually announce what's happened in the handbook. The handbook is just kind of just updated. And then you have to go in there and check it all the time to figure out what's going on. And, when you have the promises in advance to when you're going into the temple, that is improving informed consent greatly. From the time that I went into the temple, I had no real idea what it is that I was promising in advance, which is really not a good way of going about business. But is this an example of activism against the church, as some people call it, so-called ATC activism against the church, of a ground swell of a movement of people saying we need to be better on informed consent? Is this an example of change that's coming from the bottom up rather than the top down? What do you think, Rebecca?
Oh, I absolutely think that is. And first I'll say, when I read that title, More Jesus, Less Touching, I thought perhaps they were going to address the new Strength of Youth pamphlet. Then I realized it was about something else. So no, this has been a cause and a hot button, especially in the nuanced and post-Mormon world for a long time. The fact that you do not know when you go in, and you go in under circumstances that could be considered, duress or stress. And so I think this definitely is the activism, which is used as almost a bad word, maybe in the way that sometimes the church uses it. But I know especially John DeLynn for a long time has been talking to people about, you've got to let people know, why would you want someone to be a part of something that they don't understand what they're doing? So the idea now that you are sort of, the covenants are listed in the information that's given to you in the ceremony, that's a step. But I feel that you're still there, with family, with friends. It's probably before a big event. Most people go through the temple before mission or marriage. So can you really, they give you the option, you can leave now, but can you really? I think it's a step, but I would like to see these covenants really gone over in a temple prep class. I think for a long time, people have said, you don't learn anything in the temple prep class. And I've gone through the class with my 2 sons that went on missions. You attend as parents with them, and it's very vague, it's very pleasant, but there's absolutely, if I can use the word, meat to it at all. You really don't know what you're doing. So I would like to see maybe that you study the covenant, you read it, and you sign it before let's really let people know what they're doing. And then you're fully on board, and there's no sense later of a person saying, I didn't really know what I was getting into. So I think it's a very positive step. And you're right, it's in the handbook, but people don't really know things are in the handbook. I tell everyone to read the handbook. I think that's where the real information is. I think that is where the real church is, if you look at the handbook.
It's challenging because the handbook is 500 pages long, and you don't know what gets changed from week to week out. It's very difficult to try to read the handbook and get much out of it because you don't know what is being changed. But this is the unprecedented, really, this is the second endowment change under President Nelson, because when he came in January of 2019, there was a major temple change, which the church itself acknowledged in the Church News and the Deseret News. They talked about that particular change really quite a bit in the church-run media. And those were widely acknowledged to be very positive. So President Nelson here, this is his second endowment change in only a 5-year span. And that's quite a bit of temple change. When you really think back to previous leaders of the church, like President Monson, I really don't think that he changed the temple endowment at all. To my knowledge, maybe he did one small change in the temple for his entire administration. He did one small change in the initiatory, and that's all that I know of, unless someone can correct me. Do I have that right? President Hinckley, I don't think he changed any ordinances at all. And President Hunter, he didn't do any changes either. So President Nelson has changed also the women can be witnesses for baptism. He's changed the temple a couple of times. He's really, really doing a lot of changes to the church. He's really trying to transform the church into, he has a real vision for what he wants to see the church be. And he's not afraid to even tackle the most sacred cows of the church, which is the temple endowment. He's not afraid to change all that up.
Yeah, going back to the title, More Jesus, Less Touching. I have young children, and I'm thinking, maybe in my basement, I ought to print out a nice poster once they're teenagers and are dating. And in my basement, I think maybe that'll be a great protective father move. More Jesus, less touching. Make sure that Book of Mormon fits between you, right? But going to the endowment changes, I think the informed consent is a great thing. I'm a big fan of that. For anybody who wants to learn more kind of about the idea of informed consent, I'll give a shout out to the Dear Mormon Me Instagram page. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but she does an awesome story on, she calls it Choices. And my wife and I are both big fans of hers. And she goes through how, yes, technically we have agency, but that it's a little sketchy in certain spots. When you think of being born and raised in the church, born into the covenant, and there's just this expectation and there's these consequences. And so, yes, we have choices, but it's a little sketchy. And with a plan of salvation doctrine, the agency and free will is kind of the central element of it. I love the idea of opening that up more to better consent, better informed consent. I think that's a great thing overall. There's still room for improvement, but I'll take improvement.
Yeah, shout out to I have another channel that I run called Mormon Movie Reviews. And if you go to episode 25 of that, you will see that I did an analysis of the church's movie that they play in the temple. There's been basically 7 versions of the church movie in the temple. I wouldn't really call this an 8th version, but if you're interested in more thoughts on the Mormon temple movie, you can go over to my channel over there. But one question I have for you, Rebecca, is Joseph Smith in particular seemed to think that the temple ordinances themselves were not to be changed. In fact, I've got a couple of quotes here. Yeah. He said in the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith, he said, quote, ordinances instituted in the heavens before the foundation of the world in the priesthood for the salvation of men are not to be altered or changed. All must be saved on the same principles, end quote. And he also taught later that, quote, God set the temple ordinances to be the same forever and ever and set Adam to watch over them, end quote. So how is it that we are able to have seemingly so many temple changes when this is in diametric opposition to what Joseph Smith himself taught?
Well, I will tell you why. Joseph Smith did not have surveys. So this is my theory. We've seen a lot of surveys lately. These are often posted. They come from the church, where the church actually wants to find out. Do you find some of the things that go on in the temple frightening? Are you nervous? Do you feel you don't have consent? There are surveys like this where they're trying to find out what the members really think, and they are making changes based on these surveys. You can almost track it. And it's not just about the temple, it's about other things. They actually are listening to people, and they're finding out that, maybe what was comfortable for people 100 years ago is extremely uncomfortable for people now. And maybe, touching or, whatever that would be, not to get into any details. And I see them making changes based on surveys. So they are, I believe, trying to become, even though they won't admit it, a little more ground up instead of top down, because they are. What is the purpose of these surveys if not to find out what people will tolerate or what they're comfortable with? I don't know what you guys think about surveys, but I find it very interesting.
Yeah, before the big 1990s temple change, which was probably the biggest temple change that has ever taken place, it was a radical change in the temple. There was a 1988 member survey that was widely distributed, which discussed a lot of the elements in the temple. And it seems as if a lot of the changes would comport with the questions that went along with that particular survey. So, I just asked this question. Does the endowment the endowment reflect what God wants? Was the endowment then flawed on February 6th? That's what I'm questioning. If the endowment now is what God wants, then was it flawed on February 6th? Or I guess you could say that did God change his sensibilities? On February 6th, he wanted one endowment. On February 7th, he wanted a different. How do we grapple with these things? How can this be reconciled? That's the question that I have. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, maybe a secular or more skeptical answer. Benjamin Park, the Mormon historian, actually did a TikTok on this very quote from Joseph Smith. And his response was, in studying successful religions, he saw 2 patterns: that successful religions always have to change to meet a way that's comfortable for its majority base. And second thing is they have to make that change in a way that it seems like it's either better or that it's never changed. And so it's kind of this paradox, or kind of this this battle. And obviously this is a non-believing or secular theory behind it, but it seems to hold water and make sense to me.
Yeah, and that all begs the question for me, which version of the endowment will folks in the afterlife be presented with? Is it the one that their descendants happen to do for them during a seemingly random period of time? Well, because if you did an endowment back when endowments started being performed for our ancestors in 1877, if you got that version of the endowment, it's radically different than the one now. So which version of it are our ancestors supposed to be waiting for? Or can our ancestors, if I'm an ancestor, I would want to wait for a version of the endowment that doesn't include vengeance souls, that doesn't include violent penalties, is far less misogynistic, is much more Jesus friendly. Can I hold off in the afterlife and say, no, I'm not going to accept that one. I'm going to accept this one, which is a lot better for modern sensibilities. And what will the endowment be in the future? Which version of it are people having to accept? It's just, if folks, and this is getting back to that Joseph Smith quote, if folks in the afterlife have differing levels of promises and oaths presented to them by proxy, how is that fair? Because the endowment had more than 5 promises in times past. Now it only has 5. Maybe in the future it'll only have a couple. How can this be reconciled? How can this all be fair? And think about this, super hypothetical. Ages ago, when Elohim was a man on another planet, as we learned from Joseph Smith, what version of the endowment did he go through? And is it the version that we have now, or was it the version that was back on February 5th, or was it the version that Brigham Young taught, where we had the Adam God doctrine and the doctrine of the veil? Which version of it? It's very confusing. See, baptism has basically been unchanged. Basically, that's an ordinance that's not changed. So whatever anybody's presented with that in the afterlife, they're going to be presented with the same thing. Same with the sacrament, same with sealings. But the endowment keeps changing. So I know it's a bit of a rant here, but
I think you're blowing our minds too early in the morning. But the way I look at it is we have the first vision and we have many versions, if you're going to use that word. And we're told that they can all coexist together and they all support each other and supplement each other, and that we can reconcile all of them together. So maybe that's the same way we look at the versions of the endowment. There's a way that they all exist together.
Maybe so. There was a change this week from the baptisms for the dead, unless they took out the term "who are dead." You used to baptize people for the dead. They took that out. It's a very small change, but baptism is basically unchanged. Sacrament, except for the water and the wine, that's basically unchanged, even though there's a small change from the Book of Mormon to the Doctrine and Covenants. These are basically unchanged ordinances. Sealings have basically been unchanged. Confirmations have not changed. Baby blessings not changed. Second anointings not changed. Initiatories, they were changed a little bit from the Kirtland days until now. But the endowment continuously is the only ordinance in the church that is continuously and perpetually refined over time. And that's why has it changed so much? Will the endowment ever stop changing? Should it ever stop changing? Why have the other ordinances been very, very stable, but not the endowment? And that's where you joked, Rebecca, that maybe we should bring back the fire whiskey in the bathtub, which was the initiatories back in the Kirtland time frame.
I know. I think about what my great-grandparents must have experienced in their endowment, and there's a big difference. A lot of people don't know. You should look into it.
Does anybody else giggle when they think of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young and all of these manly frontier men getting naked together and washing in cinnamon whiskey? I'm sorry, that just makes me giggle.
It's something. I don't know if giggling is it, but it certainly is something. Yeah.
Well, Tom, I'm going out here on a limb here, but I'm just grateful that Jen Camp is not on this podcast, because I could be sued right now based off of what you just said. So,
or canceled. We'll see.
A little bit of both is how it's happening. Yep.
I keep hearing also, there was a tweet that came out of one of my favorite Twitter accounts here, which is Rough Stone Trolling. And they said Exmos are like, hey, the previous temple endowment ceremony scarcely had any references to Jesus in it. And then he says, well, bruh, he was in like half the film. What do you mean? He was in half the film. Anyway, so I keep hearing that the temple endowment ceremony keeps getting better, which of course naturally must mean that it was worse before. If something is getting better over time, then literally by logical definition, it must have been much worse in times past. And if loud laughter is no longer a priority for God because it's been taken out of this change, if I promise to avoid loud laughter, is that promise still valid because it's not in the current temple? See, that's the problem. When you have differing levels of promises and oaths and things like that, is that still enforced? Do I have to avoid loud laughter because it's not in there anymore?
Yeah, the decibel level in Utah is about to increase significantly. Everyone's going to start laughing again. So make laughter great again. Make laughter loud again. That's what I have to say.
Make laughter loud again. I love it. I love it.
That's good.
And I've heard that the temple attendance is increasing just for the curiosity of seeing what's new. So I almost think that's a strategy, because you do hear reports and statistics that temple attendance has gone down. Temples are appointment only, the hours are different. And now how do you get people out? There's something new. There's something different, right? It's part 2, part 3, in this case, part, 37, but you've got to get there and you've got to see what's going on. Get your popcorn now.
Yeah, I know that New Name Noah is going to go back to the temple. That much I do know for sure. That it's going to increase from that for sure. And, we covered this a couple of weeks ago that some of the temple recommends are now on there. In a couple of temple districts, they're piloting temple recommends on your iPhone. So you just have an app that you scan at the thing instead of a physical temple recommend. So yeah, there's a lot of things that are trying to get people to the temple because that's really being part of the covenant path. Really being a temple going Mormon, that's really what you want. But, just a couple last thoughts on this one, because this is a big article here. I was always taught growing up that the Catholic Church became the whore of all the earth because it gradually corrupted previous ordinances. That was the whole great apostasy, was we had ordinances, they were unchanged, and then people started reinterpreting them and saying, well, we think instead of immersion, it's going to be sprinkling, and we're going to change this and that, and we're going to tweak around because we have our modern sensibilities. And remember, it was supposed to, these apostates were supposed to have a form of godliness, but deny the power thereof, and they corrupted the ordinances gradually over time, and that's why we needed a restoration. Is that not what's happening in the temple now? Is that not, that's the question. And that brings us to our Mormon News Roundup question of the week. And Rebecca, do you have that question of the week for us?
I do have the Mormon News Roundup question of the week. Here we go. How do you feel about this week's temple ordinance changes?
Yeah, if you come on over to Anchor, you can interact with us on our poll. And I'd also like to give you a reminder that if you want to watch your humble hosts in this particular episode, if you come on over to Patreon, we've uploaded the video for this particular episode and many of the previous episodes' videos and a lot of extra bonus content on Patreon. If you come on over to there, you can interact with us there. Now, we've got a couple last articles to get through here, folks. And first is Mitt Romney is back in the news. And Tom, I've been told that he's not Mormon enough. What's going on?
Yeah, so there was a viral moment at the State of the Union that Mitt Romney seems to have called Santos out for being there. And I understand he called him a sick puppy, in which response George Santos to the media said, well, that's not very Mormon of him. And my question is, are we about to start having some language questions in the Temple Recommend interview? And if Mitt Romney, if that's unacceptable, I need to start cleaning up maybe some of my language.
Yeah, supposedly Mitt told Santos to shut up as well, and he called him an ass.
Careful, you
Ouch.
might get that NSFW explicit rating if you're saying words like that on your podcast.
Yeah, like you said, Tom, it's a good thing the Temple Recommend interviews don't ask about sick burns, because Mitt Romney, he'd be out. And Rebecca, if Mitt Romney is not Mormon enough, what chance do the rest of us have?
And that's exactly right. And I actually feel that there's nothing more Mormon than telling someone they don't belong. That's how I look at it. So he's right in there.
Yeah, I mean, normally aren't Mormons, they are not quite as confrontational. They're a little bit more passive aggressive. Is that, or do I have that right?
He said it right to his face. That was unusual because typically you'd allude to it. So the person felt kind of bad, but they weren't sure why, maybe a little gaslighting. He went right at him with those, harsh language, sick puppies. So he must have been very incensed.
And Santos must not realize that Mitt Romney is the stereotypical Mormon, a wealthy white man with with Mormon heritage and Mormon leadership. And yeah, I can't think of anyone more Mormon than Mitt Romney.
No. His grandparents were fundamentalists who were on the Mexican who went to Mexico to practice polygamy. I think his great grandfather in particular. Yeah, and he's cisgender. He's got lots of kids. It doesn't get any more Mormon than Mitt Romney, that's for sure. And that does bring us, though, to our final news article, which, Rebecca, today is Super Bowl Sunday there. By the way, who are you guys rooting for here, Tom? Super Bowl Sunday predictions?
I don't have any predictions. I'm about to get in trouble for this. I'm not a big NFL fan. I'm a college football guy and I'm an NBA guy. And I have to pick and choose because I have a young family, so I have very little time. And so I take the Super Bowl as just a chance to eat great food and sit and relax. So that's my prediction, is I am going to be fat and happy by the end of it and have a great time.
Well, good for you. But Rebecca, religion is front and center with this Super Bowl, which is a big surprise. What article did you find?
Yep, that's absolutely right. And I'm with Tom. I'm in it for the snacks. I don't even care who's playing. I'm just like, who's bringing what? Who's making the spinach dip? Let's get this going. So, and I'm also in it for the commercials. In fact, my family teases me because we'll have an extended family party and I'm not in with the TV when the game's on. But as soon as the commercials come on, that's when I go in and start watching. So I was very interested to find an article. There is several Christian churches and denominations that have banded together and they have raised this incredible sum of $100 million. And they are using that for a Christian campaign to kind of let people know who Jesus is. And they've created these commercials. The commercial slogan, I believe, is "He gets you," or "He gets us." I can't remember exactly, but there's these very slick ads that are going to play today during the Super Bowl, just to let people know who Jesus is and how we could make him a more important part of our lives. So other people in these Christian communities are questioning that amount of money going toward advertising when that amount of money could be used to, well, of course, humanitarian, feed the poor, home the homeless. So anyway, there's a lot of outcry on that as far as perhaps wasting this money on simply commercials. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but it's kind of a hot button right now in the Christian community.
Yeah. So the slogan, I looked it up here, is "He gets us. He gets all of us."
He gets all of us. Okay, so not just us, but all of us. It's very more inclusive than I even thought. That's great.
Yeah. Well, I just want the record to show, first of all, that I'm not going to be watching the Super Bowl because it is the Sabbath, and that's. I will TiVo it and I will start watching it at midnight because I need to keep the
12:01. I actually know that's not a rumor. I know people that do that. It's a true thing.
That's because the man is not made for Sabbath. What is it? The Sabbath is not made for man, but man for the Sabbath. Or wait a minute, do I have that backwards? Anyway, I'm not going to be watching it. I'm sorry. No, I'm just kidding. I'm probably going to be watching it. There's some kind of Y chromosome link with the Super Bowl with weird urges, just kind of, I don't know what it is. That I don't watch much football at all. I watch, like Tom says, because I grew up in Utah, doesn't have a professional football team. I don't watch a lot of professional football because we didn't have a team. There's a lot of college football and NBA in Utah. So, but there's some kind of a weird, I don't know, some genetic link that as soon as the Super Bowl comes out, I've got to watch the Super Bowl. So, but yes, Jesus is in the Super Bowl this time, and I'm looking forward to this commercial here. $100 million. Boy, that's a significant chunk of change.
And this reminds me of my favorite part of the New Testament when Jesus gathered the loaves and fishes and used it to pay for his ad campaign. I love that part.
Now, the commercials have already been released onto YouTube, and they have 500 million views already. Which makes me kind of wonder why we need to pay $100 million more to just have a couple extra if it's already got so many on YouTube. I don't know. This does bring us to our Mormon News Roundup poll of the week, which goes right along with this particular ad campaign. I am looking forward to watching these Jesus commercials here. And Rebecca, do you have our poll of the week question?
I do have the poll of the week. It's right here. So the Mormon News Roundup poll of the week. What Jesus-inspired Super Bowl commercial would you most like to see?
Right.
That's
so
if
the evangelical Christians are getting involved with the Super Bowl, maybe the church should too, and I came up with a few ideas about potential ads for the church to get involved with the Super Bowl, to get involved with that Super Bowl fever. And Tom, do you have number one? We've got 6 choices for this poll. And Tom, we want you to be our first person to take this poll. And what is the number one choice?
The Only Begotten vibing with the Budweiser. What's up, frogs?
Oh, the What's Up frogs. Jesus with those What's Up frogs. Now, how did that go? What's up? How did what did those frogs say, Tom? Can you give us your best What's Up here with those frogs? How did that sound again? For those
Are you guys ready? Know?
Yeah.
Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
What's up?
You are from Utah, aren't you? You are from Utah. Yeah, it's What's Up. Okay, so I think Jesus being with those frogs, that could be absolutely lit. I'd like to see that. Or is it number 2, Tom?
The Bread of Life featured just like Don Eckes, the most interesting man in the world, which, Jesus is arguably the most interesting man in the world.
Yeah. Oh, what does he say? What is the most interesting man? He's there with the beer or whatever, and he's there with what is the whole ad? What is that?
Kind of the I don't often. So you could say I don't often walk on water, but when I do, it's with Jesus. You could say something like that. So
I don't often change the temple endowment ceremony. But when I do, I make sure that I'm front and center in it, right? Okay, yeah, so that makes sense.
And,
number 2.
And remember, he's holding wine, or as some people say, grape juice, rather than Dos Equis.
Gotcha. I gotcha. Or he's holding the second anointing little pitcher, right? Yeah, got it. Or is it number 3?
The King of Kings gets into a car crash with the Allstate Mayhem dude, but the Lord heals the car.
Yeah, that Allstate Mayhem dude, he always nails something. But what if they crash with Jesus and Jesus gets out, fixes the car. That's very inspiring. How about number 4?
Emmanuel calls down fire and brimstone to level a Starbucks. Think Mormon Homefront ad campaign.
Yeah, that Mormon Homefront ad campaign, isn't it about time? Isn't it about fire and brimstone? Let's level that Starbucks. That'll send the right message. Get people to avoid as I like to call it, Lucifer's beam.
And that ad is not going to age well. Once we are allowed a few other liberties, maybe in the word of wisdom. Again, I'm being skeptical and conspiracy theorizing here, but
yeah, we're all hoping. We're all crossing our fingers for that one. That's for sure.
It didn't stop the I'm a Mormon campaign. I mean, the church spent tens of millions of dollars on I'm a Mormon campaign. So things that don't age well, it's never been a problem in the past. You know what I mean? How about number 5?
A Donald Trump inspired Messiah ministering to the people while supporting an impressive MAGA hat.
Or what was the hat that you said before earlier in the episode? Wasn't MAGA?
Make laughter loud again.
Make laughter loud again. Mala. That could be good.
I feel like I've already seen this in a painting. There are lots of paintings with Jesus and Donald Trump. I feel like I've seen this already somewhere. So
yeah, but $100 million ad. That's when you're really going to bring the eyeballs. That's what I'd like to see. Or finally, the last ad is number 6.
The Geico Gecko. 15 minutes with the LDS missionaries could cost you 15% or more.
Yeah, it could. 10% in tithing plus fast offering plus intangibles. 15 minutes with the Mormon missionaries could definitely cost you a lot. So our poll of the week here, Tom, what Jesus-inspired Super Bowl commercial would you most like to see? Which one of those 6 do you want to see in today's Super Bowl?
I've got to say, I think I like the Dos Equis commercial. I like maybe highlighting the most interesting man in the world.
Yeah, without question. I think Jesus definitely has a strong case to be made for the most interesting man in the world. No question about it. Have we ruminated properly on the great and spacious beehive, folks?
I think so. There was a lot, but we did our best.
You betcha. Now, we have some huge guests and shows coming up. We have the Midnight Mormons coming on next week. This is a day that is going to live in infamy. We have the White Cat Prophecy coming on February 26th. We have John Hamer coming on March 12th. I want to thank you both so much, Rebecca. Thanks so much for being our occasional co-host here on the Mormon News Roundup. I wish you the very best on the Mormonish podcast and on the Good Book Club. And to you, Tom, the Alternative Mormon podcast, we've linked to that in the show notes. And I wish you the very best in your podcast going forward. So shout out to Weird Alma for this episode's music. Thanks so much for ruminating with us on the Great and Spacious Beehive. And remember, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing. So,
when it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm a being with no moral constraints. My number one goal is to hurt the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Hey there, brothers and sisters. Thanks for listening to the Mormon News Roundup. And if you are enjoying this show, please consider making a donation. Patreon makes an important contribution to helping us ruminate on the great and spacious beehive here. So thanks so much to everyone for supporting us on patreon.com.